So recently our workbook club read John Carryrou's book, Bad Blood, and it was based on his front page article published in October 2015 that pulled back the curtain on the medtech darling Theranos and its girl boss CEO Elizabeth Holmes. At the height of Theranos' fame, it was valued at over $9 billion, employed some 800 people, and it boasted this impressive board of directors and investor list that included the likes of Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, past Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, past Secretary of Defense James Mattis, heirs to the Walmart fortune, Rupert Murdoch, and a host of others who collectively invested over $900 million in the company. The CEO, Elizabeth Holmes, founded it when she was 19, Stanford dropout, Silicon Valley darling with the popular TED Talk, as well as covers of Forbes and Fortune magazine, and people just falling over themselves to offer fawning praise. The then VP Joe Biden called Theranos the laboratory of the future. And such a great story. Elizabeth would talk about how she grew up afraid of needles, and so she wanted to create a faster, better, more comprehensive blood test that only relied on a finger prick. And this was some disruptive technology. It was going to change the face of medical diagnosis. But that was then. Now, opening arguments are being heard for the case against Elizabeth Holmes, who, if convicted on all charges, faces up to 20 years in prison. Bad Blood is a wild, real-world thriller of a ride. It's about a singular reporter who'd face off against a massive corporation with hundreds of millions of dollars at its disposal, the backing of high-powered executives and CEOs, a pitbull lawyer that would stop at nothing to shut down whistleblowers, a deranged CEO that would offer up wildly overinflated revenue projections, and just kept perpetuating the lie that she was in hold of some disruptive medical technology. She would steamroll absolutely anyone that got in her way, as well as in the way of the billion-dollar valuation that Theranos would enjoy. And in the process of writing the book, Carryrou would interview over 150 different people, including 60 former Theranos employees. But it was his three main primary sources that went through so much. They were followed by private investigators. They were threatened with massive legal lawsuits. And in the case of John Schultz, he was ambushed in his own grandfather's house with two lawyers literally lying in wait upstairs with paperwork ready for him to sign just to keep him quiet. This is like a vivid, jaw-dropping, real-world read that I highly recommend. It's just a complete page-turner. But as incredible as all that is, it's only the tip of the iceberg, and things have gotten way stranger since. We talk about David Boies, the sort of thuggish lawyer that Theranos hired. In the book, we find out that Boies was highly motivated. In partial payment, he was offered up 320,000 shares of Theranos stock at time of issuance worth $4.8 million. Now, Theranos, at its height of its valuation, was $9 billion, and it stood to make Dave Boies a very rich man. He would eventually go on to join the board of directors. Heather King, former partner at Boies' law firm, would leave the firm and serve as general counsel at Theranos. So it was a massive conflict of interest, to say the least. But since then, Boies would go on to represent Harvey Weinstein, using the same thuggish tactics, including soliciting the services of a private investigation firm called Black Cube, which would follow reporters as well as any woman that threatened Weinstein with sexual abuse charges. And then from there, more recently, dozens of attorneys have left Boies' firm, not the least of which because of their handling of Weinstein and Holmes, but also the kid glove tactics that they used to not, in fact, discipline at all one of the senior partner's sons who recently uttered the N-word at a company party, as well as recently being arrested for domestic abuse. So yeah, Dave Boies, it's only gotten crazier for his side of the story since. Then there's Elizabeth Holmes. Carryrou talks about how she got in a relationship with one Sunny Balwani, who was 20 years her senior when she was only 19 years old. Sunny was an integral part of Theranos, would invest millions of his own dollars in the company to help float it before it started getting some outside investments. Now, since that, Sunny and Elizabeth have broken up. Elizabeth has gone on to start dating Billy Evans, a multimillionaire, of course, heir to a California hotel chain. And she would give birth to their first child mere months before she is set to see trial and possibly face 20 years in prison. Now, what's interesting is that her lawyers are going to invoke something called the Svengali Defense. And what it is basically they're going to argue that Sunny Balwani was in complete control of Elizabeth Holmes the entire time. He would determine what she wore, what she ate, how much sleep she would get, and what she would say. She was completely under his thrall, and this mental distress meant that she could not be held responsible for any sort of fraud that she perpetrated because she was just, not herself, completely controlled. This is totally a Hail Mary play, hardly ever works. But then we are talking about someone who convinced investors to put in over $900 million in a company without seeing a single audited financial statement. She would lie about how this was being used in Afghanistan to treat US soldiers. She would convince Walgreens to deploy these medical devices nationwide in their stores. So maybe there's a chance she convinced the jury too. It is the deployment of these devices nationwide at Walgreens where Carryrou feels that Elizabeth Holmes went too far. In Silicon Valley, there's this mantra to move fast, break things, fake it till you make it. And that's all fine and good when you're talking about an application where people can upload photos and offer up their hot takes. It's another thing entirely when we're talking about medical diagnostic equipment that people rely on for their health conditions. This is basically Elizabeth Holmes willing to put people's lives in danger for the sake of investment. It's significant that the majority of the investment in Theranos came after the Walgreens deal, the partnership serving as proof the technology worked. And this had profound effects on individuals. At the trial, the jury is going to hear individual cases of people who were diagnosed with HIV, or the pregnant woman who's told that she had miscarried her child, the people who rely on these blood testing devices for blood thinning medication. If they get too much, they can bleed out. If they get too little, they can suffer from clots and strokes. And conveniently, Theranos has completely destroyed 3 years of blood lab work in the subsequent years since. Even more insidious and perhaps an indicator of the future of medicine is this idea Theranos had of patients as consumers. These devices at Walgreens were a perfect lead generation device, a way to market medication to individuals. Individuals willing to pay money for a third-party device to bypass doctors, probably lacking any sort of primary care. Now, arguably, the technology was so shoddy, it was only a matter of time, probably, before they were found out. But I can't help but wonder what would happen if she had managed to perpetuate that lie. Surely she would have offered these devices as a COVID testing tool. She had tried to do the same thing with Ebola several years earlier, and what the cost of something like that would have been. Medical professionals, arguably with the benefit of hindsight, say that this was never believable, never plausible in the first place. This technology was too far afield of anything in the realm of believability, with anyone with any sort of medical background would have been able to see through it. And yet, she was able to perpetuate this lie for years. And I can't help but wonder how many other technologies are exactly like this, built around a cult of personality with the backing of powerful investors and a credulous consumer base. How technology is created that enriches a very small subset of people at the expense of masses. Here in Canada, it's not a technology, but I can't help but think of the We Charity fiasco. In that sense, this book is about how money and connections can get you far in the world. Elizabeth Holmes is a daughter of an Enron executive. She's a Stanford dropout. Her connection to Schultz would lead the way to Kissinger and Mattis, and from there she would just keep steamrolling ahead, compounding her lies regardless of the cost. Now, like I said, we read this at work, which immediately brought to mind all the psychotic CEOs we've collectively worked with in the past. How there's this weird reality distortion bubble that surrounds individuals that enjoy even a modicum of success. How incredibly dumb people in positions of power somehow generate this field where every misstep is excused. I've worked with executives that were completely incapable of pronouncing multisyllabic words or the names of foreign dignitaries, and yet other people would excuse that behavior simply assuming that English wasn't his first language. I mean, you have Walgreens unable to see the forest for the trees, not the facts in front of them because of a fear of missing out on this, what they perceived as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We've worked with executives that had screaming tirades at low-level employees, that have bullied spouses at company events, have gone off on African safari while the rest of the company was seeing a 40% layoff. We've had stupid infidelities, complete inability to read a room, and general psychotic behavior. It is incredible, these sort of mini tyrants that all of us have worked for, that have exerted what little power they've had over us. Now multiply that by 1,000,000 for an individual that was getting fawning cover stories in Forbes and Fortune, flying around in her own private jet, flanked by a cadre of bodyguards that referred to her as Eagle One. It is hard to believe that Elizabeth Holmes was anything but a victim of her own grandiose delusions. The book is going to be made into a movie directed by Adam McKay of Big Short fame, with his current favorite actress Jennifer Lawrence tapped to play Elizabeth Holmes. I'll be really interested to see how the trial, which is currently going on right now, plays out. This idea that Elizabeth Holmes was simply the victim of Sunny Balwani, was not in control of her actions, definitely a hard one to pull off. But this, again, someone who's managed to convince countless smart people to invest lots and lots of money in her organization. Coming in as a new mother, perhaps she can pull it off. We'll wait and see. But in the meantime, tell me about your worst CEO or executive experience that you've had. You don't have to tell me the company name or the person, but just some terrible, bad behavior that you've seen exhibited by the people that you've had to work with in the past. Love to hear about it in the comments down below. Otherwise, that is it for me this week. Trying something a little new here, so we'll see if this even turns out at all. Just experimenting a little bit and having some fun. I hope you all have a great week of reading. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.